I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
Excuse me, mate. Is this seat taken?
Ahoy. Yeah, no.
Ahoy? Mate is a British term for friend, Ryan. I wasn't doing a pirate. Oh, my God.
I was a British pirate.
Folks, we're recruiting for a new co-host. Don't worry, Ryan. You're safe. Wink, wink. But, I mean, this is really getting pretty rough. Ahoy. This is the improvisation I get. Well, Ryan, number 151. It's all happening.
Yeah, we're on the other side of 150, which is exciting.
151 feels more real to me than 150.
It does.
But I think that's because this is a damn meaty episode.
Yeah, when you texted me, I was shocked to learn we've never done this episode before.
Well, this is something people might not appreciate. When you've done 150 episodes, even when you've done 50 episodes, you do start to forget what you recorded before.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will come up to me or they text us and they're, hey, I loved that one. And I'm like, we recorded that? There are a few that stand out. You know, I like when Rick Steves sent us a message. That stands out. For example.
You remember 3 or 4 of the 150.
I remember Anissa Halou.
That's a good one.
Mark Adams.
And Mark Adams 2, Mark Adams 3.
The Mark Adams outtakes. That's great. But no, so this episode, we're going to do your first trip to London. And this was inspired by the fact that
Not my first trip, but
your first trip, the listener's first trip.
Yeah.
And this is inspired by the fact, Ryan, that a friend of ours, Thaddeus, who shockingly has never been to London before, found himself going for work for a week. And he appealed to me for what should I be doing? And I thought, surely we have an episode in the archive. And you know what we've done? We've done quirky museums of London.
Obscure museums of London.
Obscure museums of London. That's not helpful.
That's mostly about whale penises, right?
No, that's the Iceland one. You're thinking of the Iceland one. No, the obscure museums of London is like the Windmill Museum.
Yes. No penises.
These aren't the greatest hits that you need to get to. So what this episode is meant to do, I think it's kind of two things. If you're going to London or you know somebody going to London for the first time, this is the greatest hits. This is telling you if you've got 5 days, 6 days to see the city of London, you got to go to these places. Or I know putting it together, it felt this way for me, kind of a nostalgia trip for those of us who have been lucky enough to be to London a bunch, to remember these greatest hits, because chances are you haven't visited in quite a long time.
Yeah, no, I haven't been to Europe since COVID-19. So this, as I was going through this list, I'm remembering all of these places.
It's amazing that you're still using COVID-19, the full name.
Yes, in case people thought I was talking about a different COVID.
I mean, knock on wood, it was probably another right around the corner. As long as that lab is still doing its important research.
No comment.
I mean, listen, okay, the jury's still out.
Our conservative listeners will like that reference. So.
Hold on, I'm trying to mix it up so that people don't keep calling us woke. And we got a recent review on Apple where they called us woke again, but I realized he was doing it tongue in cheek. He was trying to quote us.
Yeah, it didn't really work. Wasn't our strongest review. It was 5 stars, which is what I enjoyed about it. But
you know what would be terrific if somebody would go on and write well-balanced,
fair and balanced travel show,
respectful to all political views.
It's true.
Now, Ryan, I do think it's fitting before we take off for us to just say what our personal relationships are with London. How much time have you spent in London?
Well, as you might remember, I lived in London for 3 months during my time at Blue State when we worked together.
I missed you horribly back at the New York office, just pining for you.
And then London was my second trip out of the country when I was 19. I went for the first time. So I've been to London quite a few. You know, I know it pretty well.
And was that an organized trip, or did you just kind of get on a plane, put it on the credit card?
Glenn took me.
So. Okay, sure. You went with your good friend Glenn.
Yes,
a good friend to have, 19-year-old Ryan, to be able to travel around the world. Now, I have this is the city I have spent the most time in outside of New York
and Boston. Yeah.
London, I lived there for a year. I took a job that lasted 3 years almost solely so that I could live 1 year in London because I knew the middle year would be in London. And I was lucky enough. You mentioned Blue State, our old company. Blue State used to send me back for anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks a year. So got to keep it really fresh. And that was for 6 years after I lived there. So I feel like I know London a lot. But one of the glories of London is you can never really know it fully because it's just sprawling. It's so old. It's got so many stories to tell. The quote that captures it, Samuel Johnson once says, "When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life." And I think that captures it, Ryan. I think it is time for us to take off and head off to London town.
Let's hop across the pond. Flight attendants.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
And Ryan, I am going to ask that we resist the urge to use our British accents. I feel like saying most of these words, I want to do a horrible British accent just because the words are so fun to say.
I can't do my Cockney accent at all. I'll throw a couple in. A couple choice.
So because there's so much to cover here, Ryan, I'm gonna. This is the basic layout of the episode. I want you to try to keep me moving along. I am not good at these swift episodes, but we got to pack it in here.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a high level look at what to do in London, and so London is like we say about a lot of cities. It's a city of neighborhoods.
It's a city of neighborhoods. I couldn't have said it better myself, Ryan. And many of the neighborhoods folks will know from big popular entertainment. Obviously, BBC shows have a great American audience. So places like Soho, South Kensington, Chelsea, Notting Hill. I feel like people really know a lot.
That is one of my
favorite
favorite Hugh Grant films, Notting Hill.
Is that a joke or you actually love it?
I absolutely love that movie. I've seen it like 25 times.
But I think like the thing that is so striking is that I feel like you never get to the end of the list of neighborhoods in London. And that's because, they refer to Greater London. You could be in the center of the city, drive 2 hours out. They're still calling it Greater London. So the neighborhoods just never seem to stop. And so there's a lot of neighborhoods, all of which have their own personalities that when you look at the map, you're going to see. But the truth is, for your first visit, you're really going to be spending your time mostly in central London. But I having stayed there for a long time, I used to go to Brixton to go to cool restaurants that like immigrants to London had started.
You went out to Peckham?
I of course went out to Peckham. You got to go to Peckham.
Yeah.
Not on your first trip though, everybody.
No.
That's going to be for your second trip. Don't go to Peckham
or your third.
There's Little Venice, which is people don't realize there's a series of canals that run through London. People live on houseboats. And so it's called Little Venice. Doesn't look exactly like Venice, if I'm being honest. And when I lived there, I lived in a neighborhood that was not far from central London called Maidavale, Maidavale. And even folks in London weren't always aware of this because, it was like 2 streets that called themselves Maidavale.
Yeah, I think that, where was their office? Was that in South Kensington?
Farringdon, that's right. Yes. It was in Farringdon, Ryan. And by the way, when you're navigating the tube, the subway system, lots of stops have the names of the neighborhoods, so they can be pretty easy to find. I also think they're very colorful. So I would point out, for example, Canary Wharf. Canary Wharf is sort of like their Wall Street. That's where all like the big banks and things are, kind of soulless area of the city, Canary Wharf. And I never went there, but I remember distinctly one of the tube lines ends at a place called Cockfosters, and it repeats it like the whole ride. This is heading to Cockfosters, which can be great fun.
And the entire city is divided by the River Thames.
That's right. And for those who are visiting for the first time, navigating yourself by knowing where the river is can be very helpful because most of the major attractions are near or a few blocks away from the river. But things like the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben, the London Eye, which is the giant Ferris wheel, the Tate Modern. These things are all fairly close. Those I just listed are right on the Thames.
And London Bridge. It actually spans the river.
Spans the river. London Bridge, though, I feel like a lot of people mistake London Bridge. They think it's the glorious one with the 2 towers, with the drawbridge that goes up. But that's not it. That's the Tower Bridge.
Yeah, the Tower Bridge is actually cooler. It just doesn't have a song.
No, that's true. But also it's not falling down.
It's true.
So its structural integrity.
Check to make sure the London Bridge is still there before you go.
Here's a fascinating fact. See, this is where you got to watch me, Ryan, or else I'll talk about this for half an hour. It used to be that there were no bridges that spanned the river, and you would get across to the different banks by taking a ferry across.
That's when you lived there.
That's right. Back in 2011, they were still ferrying us across. But there is still a ferryman's seat on the South Shore. It's in a wall. They've built the bank out from where it was, but it's the last remaining little rocky seat that a ferryman would sit on as people gathered in the boat, and then he would leap off and take them right across the river. Pretty cool.
That is very cool.
And the River Thames, I think, has a lot of personality about it, and it's a great iconic place to visit on its own. Certainly, an afternoon spent walking along the River Thames is going to give you a great view, especially if you do both banks. A great view of the city line, because you can see the South Bank, and then looking back, you can see the great London cityscape.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a beautiful river, and it's pretty much every film you see that takes place in London has a scene there. So it'll be very recognizable to you.
Yes. And now, as far as visiting, luckily the transportation is fantastic.
Public transit is very good in London.
You can get all over the place.
Yeah.
So the first is the Tube, which is the name of their subway. It is like I would compare it to the New York City subway, where it gets you to almost everywhere you want to go, like within a few blocks. It's a huge sprawling system. I have always found it's notable that it is weirdly quiet if you're used to New York City subways.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is quieter than New York City.
It's much more civilized. Yeah. People tend to get on and keep to themselves. The seats are much more comfortable than the sort of plasticky, cold New York City seats. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get an Oyster card. And the Oyster card is the name of the card that gets you in and out of the Tube. And it's very important. I made this mistake the very first time I went to London, and it's haunted me ever since. I got a paper ticket, and it's one of these transit systems where you're charged different amounts based on how far you've taken it. So you need to put the ticket in or swipe your Oyster card before you get out.
To exit. So you need to maintain that ticket, that Oyster card, for when you exit, like in DC.
Exactly. And by the way, I was curious. I did not know why it was called an Oyster card. And it turns out the River Thames used to have oyster beds. And when they were branding this transit card, they were thinking that it suggests that it's secure because of the hard shell on the outside. And then there's a lovely pearl of a city inside.
And oysters were the main form of currency for the longest time.
You just riffing that? Is that true?
No, I'm just totally just riffing that.
I think that's true of certain Native American communities.
I'm just imagining the early Brits, and up until like the 1960s, they were just trading oyster shells.
There's also everybody knows the famous red double-decker buses. They are real. They're all over the city. I feel like when you're first time there, you got to take a ride on one just to be able to say you did.
It's a great way to see the city. Absolutely.
I'm not going to talk about the London Transportation Museum, but if you absolutely love those buses, you should go to that museum. And I will say I was always very intimidated by the bus system because the streets of London are, obviously it's over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that these streets have come together. So every nook and cranny has 3 different names. They're as narrow as can be. There are things that look like just pedestrian ways that people will go whizzing down. So it can be very intimidating to navigate your way around. So I'm going to link in the show notes to a great resource on tfl.gov.uk, which helps you navigate and tells you the best way to get between different points.
And they also have those old school taxis.
Yes, the taxis. So just as New York has its iconic yellow taxis, London has sort of these kind of very charming, sort of stout black taxis. They kind of look like hearses, like mini hearses.
They do look like hearses.
And famously, cab drivers in London enjoy having conversations with their passengers. And there's a wonderful New Yorker article that I will link to, and it's about something called the knowledge. And the knowledge is what taxi drivers call their encyclopedic knowledge of these extremely complex streets and all their names and all the difficulties I was just suggesting, so that they have to pass a test to become certified to drive these taxis. And it is an incredible amount of work. And part of the test is that an inspector or a test giver has to say, 2 points. Those points could have 5 different names, be referred to, as different things in different neighborhoods. And if you have the knowledge, you don't even blink, you can drive right there. And so something you can shock your friends and travel mates with is, keep an eye out for little scooters or mopeds that are going around and that have a little clipboard stand on the front. And that clipboard stand tells you that is somebody who is practicing to gain the knowledge. That's somebody who's taking themselves 2 different points around London, doing practice tests to try to become a cab driver, because it's quite a desirable position.
Yeah, no, that is a really funny image. I don't remember that. Well, Kieran, London has quite a few churches.
Absolutely, and of course, this is very timely for those listening in the future. We have just witnessed the grand historic coronation of Prince Charles. And so Westminster Abbey. Oh, I'm sorry, King Charles. God, hard to break the habit. I'm still writing 2020 on my checks.
I'm still writing Queen Elizabeth on all my checks.
And I'm still writing checks. So Westminster Abbey, of course, I mean, you have to visit. There's only, it's kind of surprising for me, but there's only 2 churches I'm saying that you must visit on your first trip to London. Westminster Abbey, of course, is the quintessential one. This is where all the coronations have happened since 1066. It was built in 1065. And it has the tomb of the person who built it, the King Edward the Confessor. And he was a Catholic. I'm so proud that the Catholic Church was still prevalent at this time before the Church of England took over. And
that's a whole story, folks.
It's a whole story on its own. But Westminster Abbey is really the symbol of the nation. It's where the kings and queens are buried. It's where they get their new kings and queens. It's where prime ministers are buried. There's an area called Poets' Corner, which is the tombs of Chaucer, Lord Byron, Lewis Carroll, Dickens, Shakespeare, T.S. Eliot, on and on and on. So it's just the history is in the walls and in the floors all around you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty impressive church.
It's unbelievable. And, it's great to get a guide there and really take your time. I would give yourself an hour and a half to just wander it. It's not something that you want to rush through. Something that stands out in my memory is a particular chapel called the Lady Chapel. And it has this extraordinary vaulting up in the ceiling that is intricately carved stone, just perfectly fitted together. And it's a gorgeous chapel. And also the chair that the coronation happens in, which Charles was in, is the coronation chair. It was built in 1308. And this is where the kings and queens sit in order to receive their royal office. And you may have seen, obviously, we all learned a lot about the coronation, sort of like mythology surrounding it. And there are so many objects that are part of the ceremony. And one of them is the stone of Scone, which is this Scottish stone. And the coronation chair, it has a place where the stone fits. And Scotland received it back, I think, in the 90s. But they agreed to lend it back to England.
Didn't they steal it in the 90s?
No. It was officially given back to Scotland. And Scotland said, thank you, and we will lend it back to you for future coronations. And they did.
That's nice of them.
Yeah, well, what's to be gained? They're still kind of caught up in it, but maybe not for long.
And just to clarify, in 1950, it was stolen by Scottish nationalists who took it to Scotland, but it was returned 4 months later and then given officially back in 96.
Now, you said to clarify, but really that's just avoiding a future recalculating.
Well, no, I did know that I did hear like the story of the The Stone of Scone.
The Stone of Scone.
The Stone of Scone.
Oh boy, it's turning into a Spanish language debacle here.
So that is a thing that happened, and that stone's got a lot of history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So make the time to go to Westminster. Don't rush your way through it, and you'll absolutely enjoy it. Now, the other church that I'm suggesting that you make time for, you will see, and it is iconic in the cityscape. It is St. Paul's. And the way that you can recognize it and navigate your way to it is because it has a grand dome. It's so high that even with all the modern buildings around it, you can still see it. And there's been a church on this spot since 604, but not this church. But there's been a church there for 604. And I feel like for Americans, this is all very novel. We think things are old when they're from like 1850. But 604, I mean, that's 3 digits.
Yeah, that's a really, there's been churches there for a really long time. Yeah.
And where Westminster Abbey was founded when it was a Catholic nation, St. Paul's is sort of the great Church of England Anglican church after the Reformation. And it's a great national symbol. It sort of warms the cockle of Brits' hearts. There's a great national pride in the fact that it survived the Blitz during World War II, despite the fact that bombs hit it. There's reports that bombs actually bounced off of it. So it's somewhat miraculous that St. Paul's survives in such great condition, even to today.
Yeah, that is incredible. I mean, that's one of the things when you're in London to think about the Blitz and how preserved the city is and how amazing it looks. It's really something.
And I don't always think that like the extra tours that you can take are worth it, but I do think going up in the dome can be very cool because it is the iconic piece of this church. And you can get a closer look at some of the art. You can get great views of the city. So there's a dome specific tour that you should consider. And you'll also learn on these tours about the history of it. The architect is quite famous. He built many, many churches in London called Christopher Wren. And he actually worked on the plan for St. Paul's and the construction of St. Paul's for 40 years.
40 years.
I mean, Ryan, you remember when you turned 40 years old? That was 10, 20 years ago. The dome is famed for what they call the Whispering Gallery. So the idea is that you can stand on different sides and whisper to one another. A big misconception, and this is somewhat controversial, but there's a misconception that the sound travels up over the giant dome way above you and comes down on the other side. It actually travels along the wall, so you can just stand next to each other, maybe 100 meters apart and experience the Whisper Gallery. There are so many tiled dome places that claim this. It doesn't really ring my bell.
There's no bell. It's a dome.
Oh, boy. You would kick me off the podcast for a joke like that. Now, there's not as many famous people buried here, but one that I would call out is a national hero, Horatio Nelson. This is a British commander who beat Napoleon. Also featured on Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square, which we'll be talking about a bit later. So you could search out his tomb. But I'll tell you what I think is the absolute best way to experience St. Paul's, which is each evening, and I think especially in the wintertime when it gets dark quite early in London, you should attend an evensong service. And
what is an evensong service?
This is an Anglican service.
Anglican service?
I know, right?
Oh, my God.
But
sorry, Mom.
There's choristers who train at St. Paul's, and they have a separate area where they sing evensong. And it truly is one of the most beautiful spiritual moments you can have. And what's lovely about it is you can sit and contemplate the architecture and take in the full atmosphere, even while listening to beautiful music. And it's completely free because it's a religious ceremony. So look up when there's evensong and definitely attend.
That sounds lovely. And just to note, this is the church where Churchill's funeral was held, as well as Margaret Thatcher. So maybe not a lot of folks buried there, but it has been a major part of history.
It's like the throughway to Westminster.
Exactly.
It's far bigger than Westminster, so you can see why they hold those state funerals there.
Definitely. That was quite a funeral, I'm sure.
Now, one iconic place that everyone's going to know its silhouette is the Houses of Parliament. And the Houses of Parliament, you can visit. You should check for availability. I've seen the ability to visit change a bunch, but you can also, if they're in session, actually attend and like hear out a debate in public viewing.
I would love
platforms.
to see a prime minister question time. That would be thrilling.
Yeah, that does take place in this building. It actually was a castle. I don't think many people know that. People think of it like the Congress building, but it was from the 11th century to the 16th century. This is where medieval kings and queens lived. But then it burned down in 1834. So many things burned down in London. But they rebuilt it, and it's very grand. I took a tour there when it was not in session. And this is cool because you get to browse through the House of Commons and the House of Lords, which is equivalent to our House of Representatives and our Senate. One thing that's kind of extraordinary and strikes you when you're there is that they're huge. The House of Commons has 650 members. The House of Lords, the number actually fluctuates. It's actually gone above 800 at times. Today, it's in the 770s somewhere. And that is a source of concern to some in Britain who say that it's just too big, it's too unwieldy. It's actually the second largest legislative body outside of Congress and China. So it really is quite huge, and the rooms themselves are quite huge as a result.
Yeah, it's a ton of people.
It's a ton of people, but you get a cool sense of it there. They each have a color associated with them. So the House of Commons is completely, all the upholstery is done in this bright green. In the House of Lords, it's sort of this royal red. And two of my favorite souvenirs is I have a nice leather bookmark from the House of Parliament, and it's in there's one representing the Common, one representing the Lords in those signature colors.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
And in the same complex is the tower that many people would call Big Ben. Big Ben is actually the name of the bell inside it. So just know that. Don't embarrass yourself by saying, take me to Big Ben Tower. It's the name of the bell. The bell itself is 13 tons. It chimes. You can listen to it. I feel like it's quintessential London. You'll feel like Peter Pan because I feel like every time Peter Pan is flying over London, you hear Big Ben chiming. And it's just a must do. You haven't been to London if you haven't gone near Parliament, and you don't have to go inside. It's quite a sight just to see it internally. I'm sorry, it's quite a sight just to see it from the exterior. You can go right along the banks of the Thames, cross the bridge, and take a look back. That is really the iconic way to see the House of Parliament.
That'll really ring your bell, Kieran.
We'll be cutting that
now. Your friend, friend of the pod, Ravenmaster, actually works at the Tower of London.
No, I'm not sure. No, you're being sarcastic by calling him friend of the pod.
We couldn't get him on. We've tried.
Because we couldn't get him on. Yeah, so the Tower of London is separate from the Houses of Parliament, but the Tower of London is another must-do. This, again, a former royal residence. And this is the place, again, it's got to be on your must-dos. Make time for the Tower of London. I would say at least an hour and a half. If you're really into British history and kind of gory history, give yourself 2 hours so you can take a couple of the tours. Now, the Ravenmaster you're referring to, this is a person who oversees the resident ravens, and there's a bunch of mythology tied to the ravens that you'll learn about there. He wrote a book. I invited him onto the podcast. I read the book. He never decided to say yes, which I'm shocked by. So if you end up going, make sure to seek out the Ravenmaster, ask for him, and tell him he should really go on Out of Office, a travel podcast.
We've rescinded the invitation.
No. He's still welcome. And the people who work, like the government officials, the security people who work at the Tower of London are called beef eaters. And these are distinctive. They have a very ornate and distinct uniform that you'll recognize when you see it. But it is different from the classic British Guard that you might be picturing at Buckingham Palace, which is that giant bearskin hat, the black hat and the red coat. But those people are called beef eaters. You can actually take a tour led by a beef eater. They're known to be witty and very charming and, of course, well-schooled in the history. So if you've got the time, I think it's a great way to see the Tower of London. The two things that it's most famous for is, one, the crown jewels live at the Tower of London. So if you want to see the extraordinary crowns and jewelry owned by the royal family, they are on display there. And then this is also the place where prisoners have been held forever, and Henry VIII's wives were held and executed here. So it's got, there's ghost stories associated with it. I would say that it does a good job of skirting kind of campy, but also serious history. Depending on who your tour guide is, it could kind of tip in one direction or the other.
Or who is in your tour group, as we've discovered.
Yeah, ever see a ghost?
Ever see a ghost?
That's for the serious listeners, Ryan. Now, moving right along, Buckingham Palace, famous, of course, if you've watched The Crown, you'll have seen pretend interiors of it. You have a sense of what it looks like. It's, it doesn't look like a royal castle. It's a giant building, but it doesn't have the sort of soaring turrets that you might be expecting. And you can take a tour of it, but I would say it's not worth it. You can see just a couple of staterooms. You can see the stables. But what you're really going for is to see Buckingham Palace, and from the outside, to say you went to Buckingham Palace, but also to see the changing of the guard. And this is when the guards with the bearskin hats and the red suits do this big ceremony. It lasts 45 minutes to an hour. And I'll include a link in the show notes where you can find out when it is, because it's not every day. And it's usually between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. So you're going to want to check that out. I think usually it's like 3 days a week. But if you're going to London, check, because it does shift. And it's because it really is a performance. There's a brass band, there's high-stepping marching, and it's as much a show for the tourist as it is an official military changeover of the guard.
So they have to stand there for 3 days?
No, it's just you don't get the full show of the changing of the guard. That's just
cruel.
Right? But it is notable. So these are the people who famously can't lose.
They can't flinch or anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can't flinch. And they stand with their feet at sort of an angle to sustain themselves standing upright for long periods of time. So take note of how they're standing. And you usually won't get a chance to actually, try to trip one of them up. But maybe you'll be lucky and there'll be one near the sidewalk.
You shouldn't try.
No, you also shouldn't try. Good point. Now, another place that's a little further outside of London, but I would recommend, is Hampton Court. Hampton Court is Henry VIII's palace. And this, if you're interested in Henry VIII, obviously Six, the musical, has recently brought some new interest in him. The Wolf's Hall series of books have as well. Hampton Court is where you can go for all that history. It's a great Tudor castle. I remember great halls, like a giant kitchen that had to feed 600 people all day long. So it's just these enormous stoves, and you can just imagine the feast taking place in the Great Hall. And, it's 500 years old, so it's pretty extraordinary. Of course, it's changed a lot over the years, but the fact that it exists at all, I think, is pretty neat. And you can really spend a good afternoon there. But it is, again, a little bit outside London, so you probably need 3-4 hours. So you have to be really interested in that history.
I don't know this place. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. It's good. It's a place to put on your next visit. And again, for people who are super interested in the royal history, I think it could be a first trip of London worthy. Now, Ryan, that's everything I've got for the sort of government and royal buildings. But, we know out of office listeners are, of course, big fans of theater. Broadway, famously, one of our least popular episodes. And so I won't spend too much time on it, but folks should know that London is an extraordinary theater town. It's got its version of Broadway, which is called the West End. And that's right in central London. You'll see theaters just like you would in New York with marquees outside. If you've got a night free, certainly worth it to try to take in a show. The big shows do travel between Broadway and the West End. Often they have two productions going on at any time. One thing I would say there's always like unique plays, like the Brian Cox is doing Long Day's Journey into Night in the spring in London and not coming to New York. And that's unfortunate because I would love to see that. There's especially on the play side, less the musical side, there's a lot of like unique productions. And besides the West End, there's also the National Theatre of London, which is also right on the river. And they have various really cool stuff going on all the time. Yes, absolutely. There's great theater in London. So if you're into theater, do your research beforehand. You can book up your week with tickets. I actually had a good friend who used to just take trips with his brother once a year to just do theater straight through matinees, and then they would do a night show.
I've done those exact London trips.
One thing that I think is kind of funny to do is try to search out the like most British of musicals that definitely will not translate to America. When I was there, I didn't have a lot of money to see theater, so I literally only went, I think, once or twice in my year there. But I went and saw this show called Betty Blue Eyes, and it's about a pig with blue eyes. The idea was that there was a royal wedding coming up, and this was post World War II, where there was rationing going on, and they were secretly raising a pig to eat in celebration of the royal wedding. And then, of course, the pig is so charming and has such human blue eyes, they can't do it. I mean, that's not going to sell on Broadway.
No, I don't think that's going to sell on Broadway, but I like it.
Very strange. And another place to consider going, and you could do it nice and cheap, is Shakespeare's Globe. This is on the South Bank. And Shakespeare's Globe, it is a replica of the original Globe Theater, but it's very well done. It's got a thatched roof that was outlawed in England for a long time after a great fire, but it was allowed for this recreation. And you can buy tickets to be in the stands. The benches aren't that comfortable. But what I recommend is you should go to be a groundling.
You got to be a groundling.
And a groundling is the name for the people who just fill in all the space around the stage, and it's standing only at the bottom. Because famously, for anyone who knows anything about Shakespeare, these were quite raucous affairs. And that's why many times in the plays, the actors are interacting or asking questions of the audience because they were completely surrounded by the audience below. And it was much more available to working class people at that time. And still today, cheap tickets are available to go and be a groundling. So even if you don't want to go for a full Shakespeare production, which are running all the time, take a groundling ticket, go in for an hour, experience it, look around, get your Shakespeare dose, and you can go.
It's so fun to imagine how rowdy those productions were. Now when we go see Shakespeare, we sit in the dark and we're totally silent. But then they'd be throwing stuff at the bad guys and booing, and it was just like a whole thing. So
I just love how accessible it was. I think that's so cool, and I think it's really cool that the Globe continues to have those tickets available.
Yeah, no, the theater prices. We could do a whole episode that no one would listen to.
Now, the next section, Ryan, is all about museums. And London is one of the great museum cities in the world. And it has what is arguably the greatest museum in the world, which is the British Museum. So this is where we have to start. And there's just no questions. Even if you're not a museum person, you must go to the British Museum. It is free. So you don't even have to pay admission. And obviously the history of it is complicated. Many of these cultural treasures that it has were basically plundered during the Great British Empire period, and there's lots of arguments and countries lobbying to get those treasures back today. Most famously, the Elgin marbles, which are the marble sculptures from the Parthenon. Greece has gone so far as to actually build a museum that is ready to house them should they be returned to Greece, that you can visit in Athens, and it's just like empty sitting there waiting for them. It's pretty passive aggressive, I would say. But the display of those is up close and personal because these sculptures that used to be elevated way above eye level are brought down, and you could examine them in great detail. And of course, the Egyptians collections, the Assyrian collections, these are right on the ground floor. These are like the greatest hits. This is a place where, I mean, we should do a British Museum episode separately, Ryan. But what I would say is my recommendation would be bank 2 hours for your first time. Pick up the Rick Steves guide. Rick Steves provides literally step-by-step. Here's everything amazing that you need to see. Quirky stories, but he doesn't go so deep into the history that he loses you. And it really is the most way to be efficient with your time. But then try to give yourself 45 minutes an hour just to wander the galleries so that you can really go and explore the richness of the collections, because they're just endless. I mean, in my year there, we used to go there every weekend and just take in a different room. A personal favorite thing I would tell you to check out are the Lewis chessmen, which are these famous little chess pieces that there's a lot of controversy. Are they Scottish? Are they from Iceland? But they're very quirky and have kind of Simpson-y cartoon features. So I love the Lewis chessmen.
So if the British Museum is sort of the Met of London, I would say that the Tate Modern is the MoMA of London.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And Ryan, you're a little bit more on the modern art side of things. So the Tate Modern, what I love about it, I'll say, is outside of the collection, the physical architecture is amazing. It's humongous, and it's because it used to be a power station right on the River Thames, and it's been converted into a museum. So you enter by going into this huge hall that always has a special exhibition.
Yeah, the huge hall that it is epic. People are hanging out, waiting to go in. People have come out. People are looking at the exhibition in the hall. There's usually a big sculpture thing, like a centerpiece. So that's a very cool thing to see, and it's a huge museum. And one of the pieces that I really like, and you might remember this one, Kieran, is the exploding shed. Right. It's actually a piece called Cold Dark Matter by the artist Cornelia Parker. And basically they took a shed and they blew it up, and then they got all the pieces together and they hung it. So when you walk into the room, there's like a light, and you see this shed in what looks like mid-explosion hanging in the air, and it's a very cool piece.
Yes, absolutely. So if you like modern art, again, you're going to want to bank an hour or 2 hours to explore the Tate Modern's huge collection. Everything Picasso, Dali, all the greats, but many more recent artists as well. And you never quite know what you're going to get around each corner.
Definitely.
And the Tate also has a more traditional museum, the Tate Britain. This is where they house great British artists. It all just depends on your taste. There's so many museums to talk about in London that it can be difficult.
Yeah, you skipped the National Portrait Gallery.
Oh, the National Portrait Gallery, the National Gallery. I mean, these are places that you absolutely should make time to visit. But we're in such a rush to give you the full experience. Both of those are places that have basically the painting treasures of Britain. You can take the time. This is a place where, again, Rick Steves can come to the rescue. I would recommend taking his hour-long tour, 2-hour-long tours to see the greatest hits and funny, quirky stories in there. But it just is beyond the realm of what we could cover here today, Ryan.
Yes, absolutely.
I do think now you might, it's all dependent on your taste. Maybe you prefer something like the National Gallery where you're going to see some of those more traditional paintings. But I do think one of the great museums is called the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Collection, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And this is devoted to decorative arts, which is not typically something that I like go and take in. But I find it to be such an eclectic collection for fabrics and decorations. And it's got this awesome Dale Chihuly piece. Like Dale Chihuly maybe got a little overblown, glass blown.
Yeah.
But it's got this like awesome, like, it almost looks like a sea creature hanging from the ceiling. It's just like a real grab bag of cool stuff that I think is worth a visit. It also has casts of other famous work. So from Rome, they have Trajan's Column, if people are familiar with that. But also there's a cast of the full-size David. And I had never seen the David in person. I had no idea how large the David was.
The David is huge.
It's huge. Yeah. I feel like when you look in a book in history, you have no idea how big it is.
There's a 1-to-1 replica in Mexico City right now at Somaya Museum, and it's the first time I've seen it in person, and it is absolutely epic.
And I do think it's worth mentioning of the cast. It came to the V&A in 1857, and it was a gift to the people from Queen Victoria. And then when she herself visited, she was so shocked by its you're sort of more comfortable the penis the penis that was there, that she had a custom made fig leaf created to cover it up.
She could have been governor of Florida with this sort of reaction to the David.
The V&A, they lost the original fig leaf, but they still have a replica of that, and it's so large because the statue itself is so large.
It is quite large.
So another place, Ryan, you know, depending on your interests, I recommend the Natural History Museum. Sometimes I don't recommend natural history museums in your first time in a city because, you know, going to see dinosaur bones and casts of undersea creatures, these things can be the same city to city, but the Natural History Museum in London is particularly extraordinary, right up there with the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And what is awesome about it is that it looks like a church, and it was built by a man named Alfred Waterhouse with extreme attention to sculptural detail in order to make it a cathedral to nature. That's sort of the theme of it. And so it combines all these like classical elements that look like a church, but also like exposed iron and glass, and it's very light filled. And every little nook and cranny you look in has animals and flowers and leaves sculpted into them. So you look at the columns at the top are owls and monkeys and wolves. And I just think it is so evocative to see the natural specimens within this cathedral to nature.
I've never been here.
Oh, it's extraordinary. And it was, I bought, well, my souvenir from there was, well, one, I bought a bunch of mushroom Christmas ornaments, which I treasure. And I think of the Natural History Museum every year when I put them on. And Ryan, you know, those souvenirs, they fit the 3 Ps, which of course you remember.
Potency.
They're potent.
Price.
They're well priced.
And portability.
Excellent, Ryan. Oh my God, 151 episodes and he finally remembers it. Now, Ryan, I have not gone to the Churchill War Rooms.
Yeah, the Churchill War Rooms are, it's an actual underground complex where Winston Churchill and his war cabinet basically fought World War II below, so they wouldn't get bombed. And it's really incredible. You can see where him and his cabinet sat for meetings. You can see various offices. It's remarkable to be in those rooms. And if you are, you know, interested in World War II history, it's a don't miss. I really think.
Absolutely. And I avoided it because I thought it was going to be kind of hokey because I heard there's like dummies in there.
Well,
everybody I know has said that it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, there's like there's half of it that's sort of more geared, like modern, geared towards families that kind of tell the story of the war, and that's got some hokiness to it, you know, in the sort of way that they tell the story. But the actual physical rooms, really incredible and definitely worth seeing. And they book up early. And it is pretty tight in there, so
sure.
make sure to get reservations there. If you decide to go before your trip.
And if you go back to one of our old episodes, you could hear how Ryan tricked his way in. But we're not going to tell that whole story.
No.
No, Ryan, I've got 2 more museums. The British Library. All right, you don't have to bank a lot of time for the British Library. It's not like you're going to be browsing these old, amazing classics, but they've got some of the most incredible treasures of literary history on display there, including a Magna Carta from 1215, a Beowulf from around the year 1000. They have this beautiful illuminated manuscript of the Lindisfarne Gospels, which are from the 700s. And it's just, they're more works of art than just literature. It's got a first edition of Alice in Wonderland, where at that time it was called Alice's Adventures Underground, which I kind of like better, actually. It's got a Gutenberg Bible. It's got notes from the Beatles to Darwin. I mean, it is so encyclopedic. And, if you love literary history, you could fill a day here. But if you're just looking for the greatest hits, very easy to cover it in 45 minutes.
This is another thing I have never done and I would love to do.
Absolutely. And then the final one, this is a little bit more of a quirky museum, but I can't help plugging it.
This is like the highlight of the quirky museum episode.
Okay, but it's called the John Soane Museum. I send everyone there that I possibly can.
It's very cool.
John Soane was sort of this eccentric collector. He had a great townhouse. It's right in central London. And you can see he collected all these ancient art pieces, paintings, knickknacks. His personality completely suffuses the place. They do an awesome nighttime visit, which you can look up. But the John Soane Museum is like maybe the one off the beaten path place that I'm going to say in this episode.
Yeah, it's a very cool place, and it is literally packed from floor to ceiling, every single floor with stuff. So it's an interesting museum.
Now, I've got 3 more places, Ryan. We are going to accomplish this. These are places in the city that are geographic points that you have to know, and they're going to help you get around. They're also just famous attractions that you're going to want to see. The first is Trafalgar Square. This is sort of the central square of London. It's the National Gallery, of course, is right there. That Nelson's Column I mentioned is there and is really the main point. It's always buzzing with people. It's a grand, really large square, and you have to know what it is. You're going to run through it while you're visiting all these places anyway. And then Piccadilly Circus. I only mention this because I feel like everybody's heard of Piccadilly Circus.
It's not a circus.
It's not a circus.
Yeah.
I think people are very confused by what it is. Yeah. It's basically Times Square in London. It's very touristy. It's like very grubby. You're not going to want to spend time here.
No.
But you're probably going to pass through it while you're in central London anyway. So I just figured I'd tell you what it is. Now, there are great parks in London. I'm gonna guide you to one in particular, Hyde Park, which actually incorporates Kensington Gardens as well. And this is a huge park. It used to be Henry VIII's hunting grounds. It's basically the Central Park of London. Its most famous site that you're going to go see, which is really, it's just an extraordinary park to go take walks in. It's got your ponds, it's got your trees. It's just a British spring is really something to experience because it doesn't have the humidity of many of a New England summer. And so spring and summer in London can be wonderful times to visit Hyde Park. And there's this one area called Speaker's Corner where people famously bring step ladders and soapboxes and things and step up on them and they declaim to audiences all their strong opinions. So that could be kind of fun to go visit and hear people yell.
Yeah, that sounds very British.
All right. The final thing I'm going to mention, Ryan, is Kew Gardens. Kew Gardens is a little bit of a trip outside London. It's still within the greater realm of London. And it is itself a wonderful park. It's got a Royal Botanical Gardens and a super, super cool 19th century greenhouse that's huge. It's called the Palm House. And even just to visit and wander around there, it's kind of humid and tropical inside, which is really neat to experience in London. Kew Gardens, if you've got an extra day or an extra half a day, go out there. It's very relaxing. It's a nice little train ride out of the main part of the city.
And then I'm just going to add one quick thing. There's an amazing neighborhood in London called Soho, Charing Cross, and really exciting. Lots of clubs, lots of stuff going on. Their famous club is called Heaven. And it's been open since the 70s, and it's a really cool time. So if you are down to hit up some gay bars, London definitely has you covered in Soho.
And with that, Ryan, that wraps up a whirlwind tour of your first trip to London. I hope you have a wonderful time. And, we got to do a bunch of follow-up London episodes. I have so much more to say.
Yes, you do. This was great, though. Thanks. Thank you, Kieran. And now I think it's time for the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
No, Ryan, this is my favorite segment of the show, your favorite segment of the show. It's the final segment of the show. It's why it's called The Last Stop. It's popularly known as the People's Segment. It's because we come together as a community and we share. We share thoughts, opinions, memories. We could share trips we're planning, advice that we have from trips we've taken, anything, as long as it fits this one criterion. It must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So, Ryan, I have to ask you, as I ask you every week, do you have a last stop?
I do, Kieran. Just this morning, I actually finished Ian McEwan's 2005 novel Saturday. Ian McEwan's a British novelist. He wrote probably most famous for a novel Atonement that was made into a big film a few years ago. This novel is super London. It takes place over a single Saturday in London, mostly inside the head of this neurosurgeon who's experiencing his day, all around Fitzroy Square. So I was in a very London mood finishing this novel, and it's one of those novels where place is really important, and you definitely feel transported into this kind of typical British day.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The weather in London is famously drizzly, and it is true to form. If you're getting there in the late fall through to the early spring, it can be very dark and cloudy. That was something Catherine did not love about our year in London.
Did you bring a last stop for us?
Did I ever? And Ryan, I was tempted to put this up as a quest for Rick Steves, but I decided to save it here for the last stop. Rick Steves is coming to Boston.
Uh-oh.
Rick Steves is coming to Boston. He's performing what's called Europe, a Symphonic Journey with the Boston Pops. And the idea is that now anyone who knows Rick Steves, especially his YouTube work during the pandemic, he's quite an accomplished pianist himself. And the idea is they're going to bring beautiful cinematography of European destinations and play big romantic era anthems of classical music for that just bring you, transport you to Europe even while you're sitting here in Boston. And I'm just thinking, how do I parlay this into getting them on the pod? So if you have any ideas, folks, reach out. I just got to believe that the proximity alone is going to help me here.
You got to go meet him. You got to go shake hands and be like, I'm Kieran Schmidt. And he'll immediately call security over.
Absolutely. Now, Ryan, what are we talking about on the next episode?
On the next episode, we're going to take everybody to Motor City, USA, Detroit. And we're going to talk about Detroit.
Absolutely. I've spent a lot of time there. You've spent a lot of time there. And I believe you've even booked us a couple surprise guests, experts in Motown, Motor City.
We will bring folks everything they need to know about planning a trip to Detroit. Very cool city. Closer than London. Well, it depends where you are.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but all right. Well, until then, Ryan.
I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Top of the day to you.
I believe that's maybe Irish, which is really not what you want to put on the London episode.